It's The Log. I'm Charles Purcell. So welcome to Season 2. Here we are. This is our first show of the new season, Season 2. Hope you enjoyed last week's highlight show, our anniversary show. I thought that was some fun stuff. As we've been announcing ad nauseum, beginning with Season 2, beginning with today's show, The Log is now a half-hour format, but you're still getting 1 hour per week because the second half hour of the week is Charles Purcell Presents. The difference being that The Log will handle events of the day, as always, news and opinion, but more timely references, whereas Charles Purcell Presents will be a little less timely, have a longer shelf life, and will contain more of the what I've been calling the fun stuff, the radio theater, stories, poetry, music, sound art, a lot of good stuff. So that's the difference, and we start this week, half-hour format for The Log, and then half-hour of Charles Purcell Presents. And we finished Season 1, the last time I spoke with you, with a glass half empty, glass half full kind of a notion. Democracy is now dead, officially. It happened with the impeachment trial, or so-called trial. But not just democracy is dead, also long live democracy. So democracy is dead, long live democracy. When I was a little kid and I first heard the expression, the king is dead, long live the king, I was a little confused. I didn't know what that meant, didn't quite understand. But of course what it means, or what it meant, is that the current king has just died, and now the next king takes over. It's the end of something and the beginning of something. The king is dead, long live the king. Democracy is dead, long live democracy. And the way I've been thinking about that is, and again, as we spoke last time, we talked about how democracy was never very strong, actually, in this country. It started as a very sickly baby. They had the ideas of democracy and wrote a pretty interesting constitution. But of course, slavery and women didn't vote, and there are a lot of things wrong with democracy right from the gate. But we got better. We got a little bit better as each year went by. Always one step back, but a couple steps forward, and we made progress. That is until 1980, when that ratio kind of reversed. Now it was one step forward, two steps back, one step forward, three steps back. And there's been a net decline of democracy over the last 4 decades. The 80s, the 90s, the O's, the teens. And now here we are at 2020 with the official death of democracy. You may remember that study that came out a few years ago from Princeton showing a complete disparity between what Americans wanted based on their votes and their polling numbers versus what Congress actually delivered. Their data showed zero correlation. I'm not kidding. Zero correlation. If you remember this L graph, the ideal was represented by a diagonal line going up from the bottom corner. That would represent Congress representing, actually voting for, taking up issues and voting in favor of positions of the American people held. So if the Americans favored something at 0%, Congress would reflect that at 0. If Americans favored something at 50%, then there would be a 50% likelihood that Congress would pass such legislation. If Americans favored something by 90%, something like universal background checks, for example, that's about 90%, then the likelihood of Congress passing such laws would be at 90%. And if you plot those on the vertical and the horizontal line of the graph, it creates a diagonal, perfect diagonal up the middle. That's the ideal. But instead, when you ran the numbers, when Princeton ran the numbers, the likelihood of Congress agreeing with the American people on any particular issue was at about 30% right across the line. Whether it's something they favored at 0% or 90 or 50, it didn't matter. The actual results were shown with generally a flat line at about 30% that ran all the way across the graph, all the way across the chart. So it was this stark visual, the ideal being the diagonal from 0 up to 100%, from the left-hand bottom corner of the graph to the right-hand top corner of the graph, whereas the actual plot points all sat at about 30%. So whatever the Americans want, anywhere on the scale between 0 and 100%, there was about a 30% likelihood. There was no correlation, zero, except at 30%, and that was just a coincidence. When that flat 30% line of Congress happened to meet the Americans' 30% point on the diagonal line. Are you picturing this? So anyway, they showed with their hard numbers that there is zero relationship between what Americans want and what Congress delivers. Democracy has been dying for a while. Again, it was never that healthy to begin with, but that sickly little baby in 1776 was born, got up and walked a little bit. There were moments of triumph, the abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, civil rights, environmental rights. We got a little bit better. And then with the election of Ronald Reagan began the death march. Now unions are busted, all sensible regulations for clean air, clean water, food safety, workers' rights, chipped away. Money in politics, money generally, just taking the central position as the sole currency of power in this country. And even the Democrats that got elected, they were now the new Democrats, the end of welfare as we know it, things like that. Endless wars of aggression. And all the while, that flat line from Congress, reflecting a relationship with the American people that literally does not exist. And under such circumstances, the election of Agent Orange in 2016 was almost inevitable, especially when you factor in America's original sin of racism and religious bigotry, now given voice, given a seat at the table of power. This presidency and the Senate that gleefully goes along for the ride, it was inevitable that extremism would grow, would flourish. Extremism of the right, that is. When the power of moneyed interests is let loose, unleashed, unchained, it was inevitable that the right wing would veer further and further off the road and eventually off the cliff. There was no other way it could happen. So we watched it die a slow death right in front of our eyes. And now it becomes official. It became official on the last day of the so-called trial, when every Republican ignored the will of the people, spit on the Constitution, and voted to acquit our new dictator.
Mr. Alexander. Mr. Alexander, not guilty. Mrs. Capito. Mrs. Capito, not guilty. Mr. Cassidy. Mr. Cassidy, not guilty. Ms. Collins. Ms. Collins, not guilty. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Cornyn, not guilty. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Cotton, not guilty. Mr. Daines. Mr. Daines, not guilty. Mr. Enzi. Mr. Enzi, not guilty. Ms. Ernst. Ms. Ernst, not guilty. Mr. Gardner. Mr. Gardner, not guilty. Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham, not guilty. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inhofe, not guilty. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McConnell, not guilty. Ms. McSally. Ms. McSally, not guilty. Mr. Perdue. Mr. Perdue, not guilty. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch, not guilty. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts, not guilty. Mr. Rounds. Mr. Rounds, not guilty. Mr. Sass. Mr. Sass, not guilty. Ms. Smith. Ms. Smith, not guilty. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, not guilty. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Tillis, not guilty.
Those are the 22 Republican senators up for re-election as we speak. Right now, 2020. Every single one of them voted to acquit. You should know their names. Now, here in Season 2 of The Log, we're not going to devote all of our time to Agent Orange and to his vices and to his crimes and to his buffoonery. But at the same time, we can't ignore it either. We have to continue to beat the drum, point out on a regular basis the dangers. His retribution, his revenge has already begun, firing Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and his twin brother for some godforsaken reason, firing Gordon Sondland, and now he's got his Attorney General, his toady, William Barr, legitimizing the bogus Biden scheme that failed with the Ukrainian president, couldn't get it done there, so now he's acquitted, he feels vindicated, and he just brings the job home, right into the People's Justice Department, carrying out the dirty scheme that failed in Ukraine, now housed in Bill Barr's Justice Department. You know, on our last show, we went through some vocabulary words, and one of them was dictator. Now, listen to this one more time. A leader who holds an extraordinary amount of personal power. Check. Dictatorships are often characterized by some of the following. Suspension of elections. Well, not yet. Suspension of civil liberties. Check. Proclamation of a state of emergency. Check. Rule by decree. Check. Repression of political opponents. Check. Not abiding by the rule of law. Check. Cult of personality. Check. Every single descriptor is checked except for suspension of elections. Do you really think he would stop there? So yes, we have to continue to sound the alarm. It's absolutely our duty and responsibility to call out the lies and to fight the injustices. But remember, it's not just democracy is dead. It's democracy is dead. Long live democracy. Because in November of 2020, we have a choice. We can either bury democracy 6 feet under, or we can have a rebirth. This would not be a reviving of the old, sick democracy that struggled against money and power. No. We have an opportunity to create a new democracy. But we can't bring this new democracy into the world and ask it to fight every day against the power of money. We have to bring this new democracy into a world that values the well-being of the planet and all of its inhabitants over the profits of a slim few and the hope, the false hope, of trickle-down. If February 5th, 2020 marked the death of democracy, then November 3rd, 2020 must mark the birth of a new democracy. It's a 9-month period. We're in it. We are in the gestation period of a new democracy. We're not going to dig up the old one. No. We can't dig up the old one like Dr. Frankenstein and connect diodes and breathe new life into that old monster. No. We are now entering phase 2 of the American experiment. Democracy under unfettered capitalism, oligarchy, plutocracy, kleptocracy did not survive. It's gone. The new democracy, in its prenatal stage as we speak, can and will survive only if it is born into a world where money and profit have been stripped of their power. So our new democracy can take its rightful place. We can do it. The official birth date. The official birth date is November 3rd, 2020, less than 9 months away. We have to use that time wisely, actively, caring for, nurturing, creating the best possible conditions for a healthy gestation and a healthy birth. Democracy is dead. Long live democracy.
Thank you, New Hampshire. Let me take this opportunity to thank the people of New Hampshire for a great victory tonight. And the reason that we won tonight in New Hampshire, we won last week in Iowa, is because of the hard work of so many volunteers. And let me say tonight that this victory here is the beginning of the end for Donald Trump. With victories behind us, popular vote in Iowa and the victory here tonight, we're going to Nevada, we're going to South Carolina, we're going to win those states as well. And tonight I want to take the opportunity to express my appreciation and respect for all of the Democratic candidates we ran against. Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden. And what I can tell you with absolute certainty, and I know I speak for every one of the Democratic candidates, is that no matter who wins, and we certainly hope it's going to be us, we are going to unite together. We are going to unite together and defeat the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country. And the reason I believe we are going to win is that we have an unprecedented grassroots movement from coast to coast of millions of people. The reason that we are going to win is that we are putting together an unprecedented, multi-generational, multiracial political movement. And this is a movement from coast to coast, which is demanding that we finally have an economy and a government that works for all of us, not wealthy campaign contributors. And I want to thank all of those people who have worked and contributed to our campaign, but make the point that in this point in the campaign, we are taking on billionaires and we're taking on candidates funded by billionaires. But we are going to win because we have the agenda that speaks to the needs of working people throughout this country. Health care is a human right, not a privilege. The wealthy and powerful will start paying their fair share of taxes. We will make public colleges and universities tuition-free and cancel all student debt. Unlike Donald Trump, we know that climate change is very real and an existential crisis for our planet. We are prepared to tell the fossil fuel industry that their short-term profits are not more important than the future of our planet. We are going to end a racist and broken criminal justice system. We are going to pass comprehensive immigration reform. Our gun safety policies will be determined by the American people, not the NRA. And under our administration, it will be women, not the government, who control their own lives. Now, our campaign is not just about beating Trump, it is about transforming this country. It is about having the courage to take on Wall Street, the insurance companies, the drug companies, the fossil fuel industry, the military-industrial complex. So tonight I want to thank the people of New Hampshire for this great victory, thank our volunteers, and urge all Americans to join our effort to transform this country at BernieSanders.com. So it's on to Nevada, it's on to South Carolina, it's on to win the Democratic nomination, and together, I have no doubt that we will defeat Donald Trump. Thank you all very much.
There we go. Okay. We have begun here. Season 2 of The Log, episode 1 of season 2 in the books. And we either want a democracy or we don't. And I look at this period now. Mark these dates. The trial. And Agent Orange's immediate reaction, which we all expected. It couldn't go any other way. It's like, oh, okay, well, now, okay, I can continue to commit crimes. That's fine. I'll interfere with the sentencing of my buddy Roger Stone. Retribution against those who testified against him, or just testified, period. Firing Vindman, firing his brother, for God's sakes, firing Sondland. And he's got Bill Barr right in his back pocket, doing his bidding for him, doing his dirty work. He couldn't get the Biden scam going in Ukraine, so he just brings it right home to his toady. He puts it right into the Justice Department. So now they're going to conduct this sham of an investigation. And if Biden continues to fall, he'll choose somebody else to do some more dirty tricks. Speaking of the primaries here, it's early. Anything can happen. I'm not going to make any predictions. You know how I feel about things. We got to go big. We're not going to create a world for Democracy 2.0 that was the same as before. Democracy doesn't have a chance up against the power of money. So that's what this is all about here. We got 9 months to get this done. Please stay tuned because it's not over. This is the new format, half-hour log, and now coming up, Charles Burcell Presents. So stay right where you are. It's next up on your queue, or if you're listening over the air on most of these stations, it's coming up right next. This episode of The Log is available right now wherever you find your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, iHeart, YouTube, and the podcast Source. Enter Charles Burcell Presents in the search window. Or best yet, go to charlesburcell.com. There you'll find this and all the other series in the podcast family. Follow, comment, and contact me on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks to our flagship terrestrial station, River West Radio, riverwestradio.com. Theme music composed and performed by Peter Donalds. From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Burcell.